Nora Elmwood arrived in the mountain town just as the last orange glow of dusk slipped behind the peaks. The locals said Bramble Ridge grew darker faster than any other place in the state, as if the sun itself did not trust the woods. She stepped off the bus, clutching her worn notebook, already feeling a tremor of unease at the cold wind funneling between the quiet cabins. No voices, no humming generators, only the steady hiss of trees moving against each other like restless bones. She had come to study the strange disappearances connected to the ridge. For years, travelers, hikers, and residents had vanished without leaving footprints or possessions behind. People whispered about floating lights that drifted between the trees like patient hunters. Nora believed in folklore, but she had never believed in monsters. She was sure there was a rational explanation buried somewhere in the soil of this haunted place. The ranger station was a lonely wooden structure marked by a single dim lantern. Denver Caldwell waited inside, leaning against a desk scattered with maps. His expression tightened when he saw her. He looked like a man who had spent too many nights listening to the forest breathe. "You're the historian," he said without enthusiasm. His voice was tired, as if Bramble Ridge had worn him down grain by grain. Nora nodded. "I want to understand what's happening here. Some of the stories go back centuries." Denver rubbed his jaw. "Stories are one thing. The things I've seen don't fit any story I know." He led her outside and handed her a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but barely. The ridge swallowed light quickly, greedily. They followed a narrow trail marked by wooden posts scratched with claw-like marks. Nora thought it was vandalism. Denver shook his head. "We found those after the Harper boy vanished," he said quietly. He was 10. His shoes were still on the trail. Nothing else. Nora swallowed. The air felt heavier, dense with unspoken things. As they walked deeper, the forest grew unnervingly still. No wind, no insects, not even the distant call of an owl. The silence pressed against Nora's ears, creating a high ringing sound that grew sharper the farther they went. Then she noticed an unnatural shimmer ahead. "Is that water?" she whispered. Denver stiffened. "No, those are the lights." Through the trees, pale orbs floated in slow spirals. They pulsed with a soft rhythm, brightening and dimming like breath. Nora felt an ache in her chest as she stared at them. They were beautiful, hypnotic, almost gentle. One light drifted closer, moving with deliberate intention. "Don't follow them," Denver warned. "That's how they take people." Nora forced herself to look away, but the lights tugged at a quiet yearning deep inside her. A whisper curled around her thoughts, faint as a memory not her own. She blinked hard, gripping the strap of her bag. "Do you hear something?" she asked. Denver turned pale. "That's the Wanderer. Once you hear it, it knows you." The whisper grew clearer, like someone breathing against her ear. She heard fragments of sentences and words she did not recognize. The lights shifted, weaving through the trees as if guiding them somewhere. "We need to leave," Denver said urgently. But the forest had changed. The path behind them was no longer the same. Trees had rearranged, leaning inward, creating a long corridor of shadow. The whispering grew louder, now layered with voices. Nora felt her heartbeat stutter. The lights floated forward, forming a trail deeper into the darkness. Denver grabbed her arm. "Don't look at them again." But Nora already was. The lights began to flicker, revealing brief images inside them. A hand reaching out. A terrified eye. The Harper boy's backpack. Then something else. An enormous hollow in a twisted tree, lined with teeth-like roots. Something moved inside it. The whispering turned into a soft call that sounded like Nora's own voice. "The forest wanted someone tonight." Mila Rowan pressed her camera close to her chest as thunder crawled across the sky. The abandoned district known as Milan Quarter lay silent before her, waiting like a beast that pretended to be asleep. Empty shop windows reflected the heavy clouds, and the cracked pavement smelled of old rain. This place had been the center of dozens of unexplained disappearances, almost all of them happening during storms. No one stayed here after dusk, and certainly not when the weather turned violent. But Mila was drawn to forgotten places the way moths were drawn to lamps that her boots splashed through shallow puddles as she walked deeper into the quarter. She had always believed that every abandoned street held a story. What she did not expect was how quickly this one would begin telling itself. She lifted her camera and snapped a picture of a narrow alley. When she checked the preview screen, her breath caught. In the middle of the frame stood a little girl, soaked to the skin, staring straight at her. Mila turned toward the alley in confusion, but it was empty. The child had vanished silently, without even a ripple in the water. "Not again," Mila whispered. It wasn't fear but recognition. Other photographers had reported the same girl. Always wet, always silent, always seen only once. She walked away quickly, although the storm ahead suggested nowhere was safe. Meanwhile, in another part of the district, Eland Mercer tightened the straps on his paramedic bag as he leaned against the side of his ambulance. He had been stationed near Milan Quarter for the past week. The disappearances made the city nervous, and emergencies seemed to spike whenever the rain began. He had been seeing the same wet girl for days now. Always at a distance. Always staring at him with an unreadable expression. The first time, she stood at the far end of the street. The second time, she appeared in the reflection of a bus window. The third time, she was standing behind him when he checked his rearview mirror. But when he turned, she was gone. Eland told himself it was stress, nothing more. Yet the feeling of being watched followed him constantly. Sometimes he woke at night and found fresh water pooled in the corner of his apartment, though none of the windows leaked. The rain began as a thin drizzle. Within minutes, it turned into a heavy curtain that washed the world into grisly shades of gray. Mila continued photographing, documenting how the district transformed under the downpour. Each time she lifted her camera, new shapes appeared. Strange silhouettes behind broken windows. Dripping figures in reflections that did not exist in real life. A humming sound began to pulse through the air, faint at first, then increasingly rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The storm had awakened something. Her phone vibrated. A new audio file appeared in her recordings folder. She hadn't pressed anything. A slow, wet breath filled the recording. Another. Then a quiet voice. "I see you." Mila froze, staring at her screen. The voice wasn't hers. It wasn't human in any familiar way. She looked up, scanning the street. Through the flooding rain, a small figure stood at the far end. Thin, drenched hair clung to her face. The same girl. Mila stepped backward instinctively. The girl stepped forward. Hundreds of yards away, Eland was driving through the district, responding to a distress call from a street with no current residents. His wipers thrashed across the windshield, barely keeping up with the storm. As he turned a corner, he saw her. The wet girl was standing in the middle of the road. Eland slammed the brakes. The ambulance skidded, sliding inches before stopping. Rain hammered the roof. When he looked again, she was right beside his window, her face pressed against the glass. Her eyes were pale, so faint they looked nearly white. Eland squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, she was gone. But something else remained. On the inside of his window, a wet handprint slowly slid downward. Panic rising, he grabbed his radio, but all he heard was static mixed with the same slow breathing he had heard days before. The disappearances had begun again. At the same time, Mila sprinted through the flooded street, her camera bouncing against her chest. The girl followed without sound, walking with unnatural fluidity, her feet leaving no ripples in the water. Mila turned down another alley, only to find it suddenly ending in a brick wall. When she spun around, the girl stood directly behind her. The rainlight reflected off the girl's soaked skin as she raised her head. Her lips parted slightly, and a voice that did not belong to her drifted out. "You noticed me." Mila tried to scream, but the rain swallowed her voice. And the pale listener reached for her. Tamsin Groves arrived at the edge of the countryside just as the sun dipped into a dull red haze. The manor house she was meant to stay in rose above the wheat fields like a forgotten monument, tall and crooked, its windows staring outward with a kind of quiet hunger. She was a traveling nurse, hired to care for an elderly woman who could no longer walk or speak. The job was supposed to be simple. Temporary. Quiet. Nothing about the house felt quiet. Her taxi drove away, leaving her alone on the gravel path. The wind pushed through the fields, brushing the grains in waves that sounded disturbingly like whispering. Tamsin shook it off and climbed the steps. The door opened before she knocked. Luther Quinn stood in the doorway, his expression half hidden by shadows. He was tall, thin, and unnervingly pale, with eyes that looked permanently tired. He greeted her with a stiff nod. "You must be Tamsin." She tried to smile. "Yes. Thank you for having me." Luther stepped aside without another word. The air inside the manor felt colder than the evening outside. Long hallways branched in every direction, walls lined with cracked portraits whose painted eyes followed Tamsin as she walked. The house smelled like old wood and damp stone. Faintly, beneath everything, she heard something else. A quiet counting. Soft. Steady. Muffled. Almost like someone whispering numbers from behind the walls. Tamsin paused. "Do you hear that?" Luther's jaw tightened. "The house is old. It makes noises." But the counting continued as they walked toward the patient's room. The elderly woman, whom Luther called Maribel, lay still beneath blankets. Her eyes were open, but she did not seem to see. When Tamsin leaned closer, Maribel's lips twitched. A thin, trembling sound escaped her throat, barely a breath. "Don't stay," Maribel whispered. Before Tamsin could ask what she meant, her voice faded again, leaving only the sound of the house murmuring numbers behind the plaster. Night fell heavily over the manor. The wind grew louder, rattling the shutters. Tamsin sat in her small rented room, taking notes about Maribel's condition, when she heard the counting again. This time it was louder. Clearer. Right behind the wall near her bed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tamsin pressed her ear against the cold wood. The whispering stopped instantly, as if it realized she was listening. She hesitated, then stepped back. The house felt awake. She decided to explore, hoping to shake the unease tightening in her stomach. The hallway lights flickered when she opened her door. Deep shadows pooled in the corners, almost gathering. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing. At the far end of the hall, she noticed a room with the door slightly ajar. Inside, papers lay scattered on the floor. Tamsin bent down, picking up a worn leather journal. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting. Entry, first night. I hear it counting. Entry, second night. The walls keep shifting. Entry, third night. I think the house knows I'm here. Entry, fourth night. The counting stopped outside my room. I can hear it breathing. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. Tamsin's heartbeat quickened. She found more journals belonging to previous renters and nurses. Each one ended abruptly. Each described the same counting. The same sense of being watched from inside the walls. When she stepped back into the hallway, the house groaned. The corridor behind her was no longer straight. It twisted slightly to the left. A door that hadn't been there earlier now waited at the end. The counting resumed, louder and faster. Luther appeared suddenly behind her, making her jump. His expression looked strained, almost desperate. "You shouldn't wander," he said. The house remembers. Tamsin swallowed uneasily. What does that mean? Luther didn't answer. Instead, he backed away from her, retreating into the darkness like a man afraid to step closer. Tamsin returned to her room, but the counting followed her. When she closed the door, the whispers crept beneath it, forming a pattern. 1. 1. 2. 1. 2. 3. Like the house was practicing. When she sat on her bed, a sharp crack echoed through the wall. Plaster shifted. A line splintered across the surface near her headboard. Then another. The wall pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Tamsin backed away. A voice seeped out from the crack. Soft and cold. Your room is next, she froze, her breath shaking. The wall bulged outward, as though something pressed from the other side. The numbers grew louder, filling her skull. The floor vibrated. The shadows gathered behind her, thickening. She ran. But the hallway had changed. Doors she had passed earlier had vanished. New turns appeared. The manor rearranged itself, closing like a trap. The counting chased her, echoing from the floors, the walls, the ceiling. 4. 5. 6. 7. The house was nearing her number. She sprinted down a staircase, only for it to loop her back into the same hallway. The lights dimmed until only a faint glow remained. At the end of the corridor, the wall split open, revealing a dark cavity. A hidden room. Someone whispered inside it. Tamsin took a step back, but the floor moved beneath her feet, tilting her forward. She stumbled into the darkness. Something cold wrapped around her ankle and pulled. The house exhaled a long breath, almost relieved. Behind her, the doorway sealed itself shut. The counting stopped. The house had added a new number. And outside, in the silent wheat fields, no one heard Tamsin Groves vanish as though she had never lived.